So we ask ourselves the question, how does porn affect our lives on a daily basis? Well, in this particular video, I wanted to do a couple of interviews, one specifically. But the interesting thing, how does this affect our day-to-day life? Has this been something that's been going on for 1,000 years? Well, we got human record that says otherwise. But the real question we need to ask ourselves, how does this affect us daily? Now, in the generation and times that we live in, it's probably normal. Everybody, or should I say most people, know about it, and it is very accepted by diversity and large ranges of people. This is something that has not only has affected the modern times as normal, but even the church has issues with it, meaning that its pastors, its practitioners, its deacons, they are involved in it. And there are statistics with that. So when doing this particular video and just beginning to really, seeing through it and really beginning to understand, I realized that this is something that has affected the church as a whole. This has affected definitely even children. And it seems to be that the younger they get, the more they are exposed to this. Now, a lot of this is large range to media, of course. And this is something that doesn't affect men only. And it also affects different ages as well as women. So we can see how something like this has trickled down throughout the centuries and throughout the years and has affected men, women, and children. And we are in a generation now where everything is acceptable. Now, the last time we crossed such a road, we called it the flood. Well, everything that was done was evil continuously. And the way of doing wrong affected everybody, except for, say, 8 people. So we are indeed living in those times. So what we're going to do, we're going to discover a few things. We're going to discover individual, talks about how he grew up with this, and how it affected him and how he was delivered. We'll hear from testimonials from other people that have actually participated in the porn industry. We'll talk about the devastating effects on that individual's life, and of course the extreme measures of how far do you go. In this case, most people see porn as entertainment, as a place of relaxation, but how deeper and darker can something like this possibly go? Well, there's an individual which we'll put on this that deals with not only the deepest, darkest side of it, but how a simple person became so addicted that it drove him to act it out and murder and then some. Now, those are the devastating parts. But what I can tell you, after looking at all of this is definitely a spiritual issue. So the word porneia in itself is far more wider and grander than anything. Now, we accredit the Romans for really popularizing this in their society. Ultimately, it was their lavish lifestyle, especially in this area, that helped contribute to its downfall. But let's not forget that the Babylonians and the Egyptians also played a role in this as well. Okay, but what the Romans did was they took the idea and expounded on it. And we are in a generation today that the Romanian or the Roman spirit lives in this country. Rather, we see it in our monuments, we see it in our actions, we see it in people, and we can see that all that eventually declines. So let's just kind of focus on the results of what porn actually does. So how did you start out? Just everything that happened.
Man, so about the age of 10, going into 11, kind of when I was figuring out, the whole masculinity, but at the same time, as puberty was kicking in, I was still battling rejection, from having the skin disease, eczema, so I kind of isolated. But in that isolating and in the midst of that hurt and in the midst of wanting to be accepted, in the midst of hormones raging, one day, someone that I didn't even like said, hey, let's go to a train yard where they bury trains, so to speak, right? So got on a bike, went with him and a few other guys. We were hanging out, and there was an old pornography magazine in that train yard. And I had never seen anything like that. So I was like fascinated with it. And so we left. After I looked at it, we left, but I went back on my own and I got it, brought it back home, snuck it in the house, and there you go from there. I think even before that, before I knew about how women were made and all that stuff, I began to even have like dreams of women. But since I didn't know what to do, then I would just have dreams about them, and it would be arousing. So finding that, and I believe that the enemy can come through suggestions, in our dreams, right? So finding that magazine, 1 + 1 = 2. This is the dreams. I now understand the dreams, and now I see why, brought them together, and therefore, and there you go, pornography being, reviewed by me. So, of course, along with pornography, and a lot of guys say, oh, I don't need it to fulfill myself, masturbation. But okay. However, I don't want to deny that the fact that they're telling the truth or not. But I can say for me, it was a combination. If I was looking at pornography, I was looking to fulfill myself. So there also went, viewing pornography and self-gratification, and it became very addictive.
At what age you would say?
11. As soon as I opened that magazine, and I knew exactly, what I wanted to do, because the magazine would help me understand about, the release. So unfortunately, I learned about the birds and the bees the very wrong way, the very wrong way. Nothing about what, parents did or did not do, other than, you can't watch a kid 24/7. You can't do that. So, anything that's going to get past the radar of sneaking stuff into the house, unless there's divine intervention where the Lord just says, hey, he's got porn, go check it out, I got past the radar, so. Now this went on for years, like a roller coaster. I figured by the first time I would have a physical relationship with the female, of course, at the age of 16 or 17, something like that. You would think that would trade places with, pornography. No, sir. Nope. It strengthened it, as a matter of fact. So I began to indulge more, because the actual act was not as gratifying. That's crazy, right? It wasn't as gratifying as the selection that you have with pornography. So when the enemy threw pornography out there, man, he threw a trump card, because, you can do it in secret. Obviously nobody has to know. You can buy them from anywhere at that time, those magazines, and even sneaking around with VHSs and stuff, just crazy, right? But it strengthened it. So after that, relationship, 1 or 2 relationships, went to the military. You would think then in boot camp, dude, no way. You're going to be too tired, you know, but amazingly, you get a hold of that material even in boot camp, you know, basic training, you know, where they got eyes on you. And I remember one night, and my drill sergeant came by my bunk, and I was looking at it. We're supposed to be asleep. We're not supposed to have any contraband. Flashlight, he looked at it, looked at me, kept walking, didn't even say anything. You know, but had I been up in the middle of the night reading a Bible, he probably would have said something. Hey, put that down. You're supposed to be asleep. You know, kept on moving, right? So let's fast forward to marriage, first marriage. You would think that, okay, I'm married, I'm satisfied, you know, with the marriage, you know, physically, mentally, and all that stuff. Right. No, sir. Same old thing. As a matter of fact, I tried to encourage her, hey, you should watch it with me, right. You know. But that was a roller coaster relationship anyway, abusive on both sides, verbally anyway, and then these habits. But then the habit of pornography. But then I began to go, okay, God, I was raised in a Christian home. What am I doing? You know, what am I doing? So even in the military, I began to attend church, and I would just start really focusing on believing and tearing away from it. You know, I would try praying. I would actually pray and start to at least read my Bible and start to try to be a better husband. But even with all of that, those were failed efforts, because I really, in my heart, I wasn't at the end of wanting to get rid of this, because I still needed that crutch in my mind.
Now, the testimony of Jackson is important because he starts off as something innocent, something that he ran across. And from that particular moment, it took him to a whole nother level. It spiraled out of control as he got older, to the point to where he was consumed by it. 30 years. 30 years. And indeed, it is slavery. He talked about, in general, just how it started so innocent. Well, let's consider an individual that was in this industry and how it affected them. Because it's not so much that you are participating in porn, but what happens is if you are the one or ones that's actually doing that very thing to get the masses excited. What effects is on that individual's life?
Some say that it is entirely inappropriate to do porn on Sunday, and I say it's even more inappropriate that 68% of Christian men and 35% of Christian women are viewing porn. These are God's people. That is inappropriate. And it is inappropriate that the largest group for viewing porn online is ages 12 to 19. That is inappropriate. It's inappropriate that 56% of divorces are caused because the spouse is hooked on porn. It's completely inappropriate, not only for people, but especially for God's chosen people, his kids. So I'm sent here by God to set the record straight and to ruin your appetite for porn, and I'm going to increase your appetite to know God and know his power, because if he can heal an ex-porn star, he can heal anybody. Here's my story. When I was a little girl, I was adorable. I was very animated. I was writing poetry. I taught myself guitar. I was just an adorable little girl that really was neglected, and no one really developed me or really noticed me. My mother thought I was peculiar, and I was like raising twins. And my father was distant. He was a workaholic. And so I grew up thinking God was mean and distant. But I loved Jesus. And I grew up the first 8 years of my life in Sunday school eating Ritz crackers, listening to my teacher talk about Jesus and Moses and Joshua, and I just loved God's word. I was a very spiritual little girl, and I loved Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. Munch, munch, munch. But at 9 years old, something terrible happened to me. I was sexually abused by a teenage boy and his sister. I had my first heterosexual and homosexual experience at 9 years old. I was devastated. I was in shock. I was not the same. Something very bad happened that day. And I remember I heard an evil voice say to me, "You're a bad, dirty little girl." And so I grew up thinking I was bad and dirty, and then with parents who didn't pay attention, and my mom calling me names like forgetful, lazy, peculiar, I grew up feeling like I was never good enough, that there was something really wrong with me, and that I must be utterly unforgivable, that nobody loved me. And so I grew up, I still loved Jesus, but I started to do things like masturbate at 9 years old. I didn't understand why. Or I used to always have thoughts like of me with older men. I didn't understand why. The sexual abuse caused me to start acting out sexually. I started, by the time I was a teenager, I was definitely acting out with the boys because they told me they loved me. So if I give them sex, then I get to hear from a male that I'm loved. All he ever wanted was my dad to tell me that I was his precious little girl, and that I was his champion daughter, and that I would go far in life. But I never got that. I barely can remember even being affectionately touched or hugged by my dad or hearing, "I love you." Instead, I was just always growing up that I'm unlovable, I'm ugly, no one loves me, I must be a mistake. My mom sometimes used to say, "You're supposed to be a boy," or "We can make more of you. I can't make more of your father, but I can make more of you." I mean, that's what I grew up with, verbal abuse and neglect. So I was not a happy teenager, and I started to act out, and I was doing crazy things just to get their attention, like leaving bottles of vodka in my closet, or writing down letters, about me having sex around the house, and my mom she says, "We just put our heads in the sand. We didn't know what to do." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean? We're a Christian family. Why wouldn't you know what to do? Don't you have the Holy Spirit? Don't you have the Word of God?" But my parents stopped attending church. They thought if they stayed home and watched church on Sundays, that was enough, and they didn't have to really train us, and then they felt good. In fact, when I was a little girl, I went to church on my own, and I brought my brother and sister with me. Well, they stayed at home, because I loved church as a little girl. So I'm this crazy teenager. I'm in a bad mood. So now Madonna has come along. I was in the 80s. And I loved Madonna. I was going to be just like her, and I was going to be crazy and shocking. I was going to shock everyone. I was going to be shell shock. People will pay attention to me. And see, what the devil does is when you parents don't parent your children, he sends new parents. See, God has a destiny for your child, and Satan has a destiny for your child. And I always tell parents, you're in competition. You've got to compete for your child, especially in this hypersexualized culture and this culture of the kind of music that they listen to. I know all these kids are like, "It's just Katy Perry," or, "It's just Madonna," or "It's just Britney Spears." I'm like, I don't know if you guys know this, you teenagers, but that you've seen these things go on, or like this kind of stuff go on? Yeah, that's satanic signs that Hollywood is making right now. And I mean, Justin Bieber's doing it, there's Rihanna's doing it, everybody's doing it. So this culture is all about Satan deceiving you. He wants your soul. He wants to destroy you. And he was out to destroy me, and especially people who are chosen by God and have a call. He was after me from the womb. My mom almost hemorrhaged me. From the womb he was after me, because he knew that God has called me to preach the gospel. And God has called you to do something. Everyone in this room has a purpose that God wants to fulfill and use you for. You are not a mistake. You are not here by accident. In fact, the devil hates you so much, you'd be dead right now if God didn't have a call in your life. So the devil had a call in my life too, and by the time I was 18 years old and barely graduated high school, like I cheated. I still don't deserve that diploma. My dad kicked me out of the house. Just one day he says, "Get out." I'm like, barely turned 18. Where am I going to go? I've never been out of the house, like with no place to go. My dad says, "Get out. You're not living here no more." And I remember these 4 words: "You're dead to me." And at that moment, something terrible died. I was full of rage, and I swore I'd never speak to those people again, ever. and I hated them. I was so filled with hatred for them. Rejection came in, my dad said that. Hatred came in, my dad said that. And so I ended up in California, in the porn valley, in San Fernando Valley in California. I did not know it was the porn capital of the world. I had no idea, but I know what it's like to be hungry and homeless. And I sat there on that curb crying my eyes out, crying to Jesus, Jesus, where are you? Jesus, where are you? Remember Sunday school? Remember the time I was 6 years old and Jesus told me that I was going to preach the gospel to thousands of people someday? What happened? Why are you letting me sit on this curb? No answer. And then suddenly this man comes up to me and says, Sweetie Pie, what's wrong? And he put his big arms around me and he let me weep on his chest. And it was the first time that an older man had touched me like that. And it felt so good. So good. And I thought Jesus had come to rescue me. And then he told me, there's a nice man across the street who'd like to make love to you for $35. And I'm like, no, I'm a lot of things. I'm a rebel. But I'm not a prostitute. And then all of a sudden that evil voice came to me and says, Shelley, your parents don't care. God doesn't care. And I thought, yeah, why should I care? And I sold myself for $35 into a crazy life of prostitution. In that crazy life that I was in for 6 years, I bounced around between stripping and prostitution. I'd feel guilty because, see, I knew God. I felt guilty doing prostitution, and then bizarre sex acts, and then people putting guns to my head, knives, threatening me, asking me to do the most vulgar and vile things. By the time I was 19, I was a bona fide hustler. I could hustle any man out of his last dollar. I was taught by Madam the luxurious side of prostitution, and how to barter and get every last dollar from every man and tell him, I love you, you're so amazing. All the things his wife won't tell him, I was taught to lie. That is the native tongue that sex workers speaks. We all lie. I have never met a prostitute, a porn star, or a stripper, or any type of sex worker that tells the truth. That would be impossible because we would not make any money. And that's why we do it. We want your money. We think all men are pathetic pigs. But the porn stars tell you, I love you. Ooh, I love it so much. I just want to be with you. Yeah, right. You see how easy that was for me to do? Now, I do use these illustrations for your good. Just so you know that. Because I want you to connect and go, yeah, I guess I do believe that lie, huh? Yeah. And so as I continued this crazy lifestyle, I started getting into drugs, and I started getting into alcohol really bad. I got pregnant 2 times the first 14 months because I didn't understand the rules. The rules were, always keep your eye on him because he will rip his condom. The second rule is we don't kiss. The third rule was I got to be looking at him all the time around me to make sure nobody was going to hurt me. I was a survivor, a combat veteran, constantly surviving, looking around. If this guy's going to beat me, I have to run. If he brings crack cocaine in, I have to run. I mean, it was insane. Finally, after about 6 years of being burned out from this lifestyle in the strip clubs where men would tell me, your butt's too big, your thighs are too small, your nose is too small, your boobs are too small, your hair's too short, constantly being told by men I was never good enough for them. That message came straight from my father first, and then the men in the bars. And then the second message men have always told me is that they could never, ever be trusted. Do you know how many wedding rings I saw on fingers while I was in the sex industry at the strip club? They were arrogant about it. They weren't even hiding their rings. In fact, it says 55% of married men view porn regularly. Wake up, wives. Oh my goodness, how many wives have said, I had no idea, I've been married 20 years. I go, you have no idea you're married to a porn addict? Where's the Holy Spirit? I'd know. You better believe I'd know. In fact, I'd check up on mine. He would never do that, but might be that old survivor in me, I don't know. The computer. Hi, honey. There's nothing wrong with asking your spouse, are you viewing pornography? If you are, you need to get help. Anyways, one night I was in the strip club and I was burned out. By then, I just put my hand up and a drink was automatically put in it, sucked down my Jack Daniels and Coke, whatever. And this porn star comes in, because it's very common for the porn industry to send in older porn stars to strip clubs. It's called feature dancing, but they're really there to get fresh meat. And so this porn star came in to get her fresh meat, and she looked at me, she goes, "Oh, you're so hot, you should do porn." I'm like, "Porn? What's that? You know, like sex in front of the camera?" This is in the 90s. And she goes, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Is it safe? Like, from STDs and stuff, like AIDS?" "Of course it's safe. We're the cleanest people in the world. We get tested every 30 days. Well, let me tell you about that famous 30-day porn star test. The day after they take the test, if they have unprotected sex, that test is no longer valid. There's no way that testing works, because the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, which we work with, sent out a report in 2009 that there were 2,396 cases of chlamydia, 1,389 cases of gonorrhea, 31 cases of HIV, all within about a 5-year span, and there's only about 1,500 porn stars, which for those 1,500, only 100 are men. So 95% of all those diseases are happening to women. It is a completely diseased industry, but of course, they don't show you that. And let me tell you, those girls are not allowed to speak badly at all about their business. First of all, they need the money. Second of all, they feel they have no option. Third of all, pornographers threaten porn stars. They threaten young women, 18, 19, and 20-year-old women. They make them sign a 3-page contract that they can't even read. They don't know how to read things like signing, "I waive my moral right," or my right to my image, or my right to my name. I know girls who gave their name over to the porn industry. They don't know that. And no one told me either. I believed the pornographers. I believed the porn stars. They told me if I got my AIDS test, I'd be kept safe. So I started getting into porn. I started off kind of amateur. I was very nervous about it. In fact, my first scene, I was just like, "Oh my gosh, how do I shake hands with someone I'm about to have sex with? This is weird." Even for a prostitute, this was weird. It was really dark. It was really evil. It was like, I call it Satan's final frontier. The porn industry is his throne room. And so when I started to do the first scene, all of a sudden I was really nervous, and all of a sudden the devil just came over me like a black cloud and says, "Shelley, I'll make you famous, and everyone will love you." And he entered me, and that supernatural evil power and all the rage I ever had fueled me, and I became this porn star, this wild girl. And all of a sudden the pornographer goes, "Oh, you're going to be the next hottest, biggest porn star. Oh, you're going to be so famous." And he just fed my ego. He fed that little girl that never was told she was great. He fed that little girl who needed to prove that she was something special. If I couldn't be good at anything, I was going to be good at this. I was going to be the best porn star. And that is the attitude of all porn stars. And so sure enough, I got into hard porn and grosser porn. They would call me to the set and say, "Oh, you're just doing this." And then all of a sudden, I'm in a group of having sex with maybe 6 or 7 guys, including the cameraman. And of course, we had alcohol and drugs. Hello, we're standing outside, naked, going, smoke. That is so common. In fact, in the porn industry, like 95% of people like smoke pot like it's a cigarette. Just always have pot. Even the porn conventions where we go, reach out to them, I'm like, "Dude, can you take your joint and blow it that way, please?" Because I don't do that no more. But it was a horrific set. Most of these movies are filmed in private locations where there's no government access. It's usually a crew of older males, about 6 to 8 older males, and maybe 1 or 2 young girls, 18, 19-year-old. And they're intimidated and nervous. Nowadays, these girls are being lured in right off of Facebook and all the social media. They have no experience. And of course, it's violence against women. It's horrific. It was horrific when I was in it. Now it's to the point where all of you who are viewing porn are learning violence against women. You think, well, that's what women like. They want to be beat up. They want to be spit on. They want to be raped. They want to have their hair pulled and be hit. That's what porn is about. But that's not true. That's not what women want. And so as I continued to do these harder and grosser porn, I got harder and grosser. I got more demonized. Let me tell you, I was possessed. You could see it in my face. You go to my website, I have some before pictures, headshot. I was like, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even make that face if I tried. I can kind of try, but it was just so evil. My eyes were even dark. I was so dark. I lived in the dark. I had curtains closed all the time. I had candles. Even in the summer, I was just getting darker and darker, getting deeper into drugs, doing cocaine and meth, drinking. Because you know what? When you do porn, there's no piece of humanity left. You become that character. Like, porn stars are better actresses in Hollywood. In Hollywood, Julia Roberts can step out of character, but not in porn. We live that character day and night. We are the porn star. We never step out of character. Everywhere we go, our body parts are talked to. Men look at us from the neck down. We are objects. We are not people anymore. That was Satan's goal. And his second goal is not only did he want to make porn stars turn, which, by the way, I want you to think about this. This industry is mostly run by older Jewish males, and more than half the industry is made up of Christian girls. You think Satan's trying to mock the church, especially mock God? And so after about 30 movies, I got burned. I woke up one morning with a fever of about 104, and I looked in the mirror, and I had sores all over my mouth, all over my body. What is this? Oh my gosh. And I went to an Indian doctor, and he looked at me and goes, oh, you have bad case herpes. I said, herpes? What is herpes? No, herpes, non-curable. Non-curable? Did I hear you right? He gives me a pamphlet and tells me to call the Herpes Foundation, and then they told me that I would have to separate all my utensils, my food, and my towels from my daughter. By then, I was a single parent. I got pregnant by a Japanese man, a trick. So my eldest daughter is half Japanese. She's very beautiful. So not only now am I affected, now my child, I'm thinking, I'm so irresponsible. I don't even pay bills. I don't even wash clothes. And you're telling me I got to separate stuff from my daughter? I was the most horrific, horrible mother in the world. Porn stars are terrible mothers. In fact, just not long ago when they were at a porn convention, a well-known porn star and her husband got in a domestic fight in front of their kid and got arrested in the hotel. They're horrible mothers. My poor little girl, Tiffany, I would give her a beeper and tell her to wait at the park while I pulled tricks. She was only 3 or 4 years old. In fact, she started watching porn at 4 years old because she stumbled upon mine. She thought her mom was a movie star until she saw me get violated. And then she began to masturbate and sexually act out. See, not only are we affected, but our kids. Porn does nothing but destroy. If porn made us all healthy by now, wouldn't we all be healthy? There's no healing in pornography.
Now, we should consider the statistics of the effects of porn, how it affects men, women, children, and especially the church. And see, here's the thing, and I throw this emphasis not to so much destroy or make the church look bad, but we need to call out everything that causes it to fall for what it is.
Dive right back into your book and get this program moving. People watching the program, they probably identify, if we were to describe an American culture decaying as we speak before their eyes. This is supernatural. This is not just coincidental. We are generations removed now from great generations that understood war, that understood why we have the freedoms that we're squandering now. Okay? They're influenced by supernatural forces, Jonathan, they couldn't even comprehend while they're addicted to their handheld technology, and all of this is happening right before our very eyes. But there is another God. Who is the enchantress? And what was she known for in the ancient pagan world?
Yeah, we spoke about the possessor last time, and that in Hebrew is Baal or Baal. Baal had a wife. He had a consort in the Canaanite mythology. Now, and it was this goddess who actually appears all over. She's known in the Bible as Ashtoreth or Ashtorah. It says, Baal and Ashtoreth. She's known, though, in other places in Mesopotamia, we know her as Ishtar. also as Inanna, also as Astarte. Also, when she came to Greece, it was Aphrodite she became. And then Rome, Venus she became. And all these, they bear the same things of this, what starts there. The thing is this, she's the goddess of, as you said, she breaks convention, she bends whatever she can, and she's the goddess of sexuality and sexual immorality. She's also the goddess of war at the same time. She's also the goddess of prostitutes. She herself is a prostitute, and she is the goddess of rampant sexuality. So when you look at what happened to Israel, first comes Baal, then comes the goddess, Ashtoreth. And so they get into sexual immorality. That's part of what happened. But look at America now for a moment. What would happen if she comes? First, it's the putting out of God, opening the door. Baal comes in, the possessor, takes a nation to make it forget God and forget it even knew God. That's where we are now.
Right.
And it all started early 60s. But what happens right after that? If she came back into the world, if she came back to America, there would be something that would affect, that would change sexuality. What happens? The sexual revolution happens.
Okay.
Right? Like clockwork. And in the Bible, it's always Baal, Ashtoreth. So first that, then comes it, starts overturning sexuality, overturning norms that have been there for 2,000 years. Christian version, marriage, family, everything gets overturned. She hasn't stopped. We are still in this now in a deeper stage. But that's what all begins, like clockwork.
Right. We don't even know at this point what ends this will serve. How far will God allow this to go before he returns and judges the world?
Yes.
What is her connection? Is it the teaser of the beginning of the program? I mentioned pornography, which, if you've done your research, you know that this is affecting our church leaders now.
Yes.
Allie and Donna wrote a book, Dark Covenant, in which they brilliantly outlined how many of our leaders, this is your youth pastors, folks, this is your pastors, are now more than 40% of the church leadership in this country either casually or self-identify as one who might be addicted to pornography. What is her connection to pornography, drugs, witches, and the occult?
Yeah, she is called the harem too, which means the prostitute. So a prostitute, number one, takes sexuality out of the marriage chamber and into the culture, into the public square, into the marketplace. So first, she sexualizes the culture. We turn away from God.
Yes.
This is what comes in. And so with that, she was also the goddess. She's called in Greek, the name is Porne. This is where we get porn from. The first literature we have really in the world, pretty much, of pagan literature is about her. The literature of the prostitute. When you translate that into Greek, that is pornography. Pornography. The very beginning is with this goddess, the very beginning. She multiplied images of naked people through clay and stone of herself all throughout the culture. She's the one who possesses the culture through the sexuality. She paganizes the culture through sexuality. She overturns Christian sexuality and makes it pagan sexuality. So what we've been watching the last 50 years or so, the same thing. It's the paganization of sexuality. All these things go back there. So you have that. Now, here's another thing. We talk about erotica all over. The word erotic comes from Eros. Eros was the god who's the son of Aphrodite, who's Ishtar in Greek form. So even that comes from her. She is also the goddess of she dwelt in the taverns, in the alehouses. That's what it says, that was her temple. She's the goddess of intoxicating substances. So she's the one who intoxicates. I call her the enchantress. She was called that. She seduces. So all these things. So what she did, now what we watch in America, you have the turning, you have the sexual revolution. In the same you have an explosion of addiction, of drug use, a drug culture, all starting in the 60s. We are more addicted now than ever to this. So that is there. So you have drugs, but she was also the goddess of casting spells. People would pray to her to cast spells on people. She was a sorceress. She is the goddess of the occult. So what do we see? We see, like clockwork, you see the sexual revolution, you see that, and then you see in the 60s an explosion, revival of the occult, revival of witches, women becoming witches, which is to come into the image of Ishtar, of the goddess. And so right now we have more witches in America than we have Presbyterians. That all comes from the goddess.
You know, what's really astonishing is that we are told that this way of viewing the world is very progressive, that we Christians and, you know, the Judeo-Christian morality that is outlined in the Bible, in the law that was given to Moses, that's old-fashioned, that's from an outdated time, that's a very patriarchal culture. We need to throw this off. The fact is that Inanna and what Jonathan is talking about, that literature goes back to 3000 BC, the very beginning of writing. So when Moses came down the mountain in 1446 BC or thereabouts, this type of worship and the sacralization of deviant sexuality was very, very old.
Yes,
So what the
yes.
progressives are telling us today is forward-thinking and progressive is actually regressive. It's
That's
taking us
right.
back to a morality that's 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
To me, porn is a drug. These words belong to Alex, a porn-consuming young man, which I interviewed for my co-author book on how porn affects our health. He was 6 years old when he first stumbled upon porn. And the images were so strong, he told me, he even had trouble sleeping afterwards. Today, he is 19 and still haven't been able to quit porn. It's like having sober periods with relapses, he explained, where I need more and more aggressive porn to experience the same kick. Would you think about this? A society where our attitudes aren't constantly being shaped by porn. A society where porn doesn't get to set the standard for our sexuality, our relationships, our attitudes, before we even have a chance to explore these amazing things for ourselves. My favorite sitcom of all times is Friends. If you do not know that one, and I definitely think you should, it's the very popular American TV show about 6 friends living in New York City. In one of the episodes, the 2 characters, Joey and Chandler, had, by mistake, may I add, gotten free cable TV access to porn. Oh, happy day, right? I mean, they were so happy, they did everything in their power to keep that TV on. And that kind of made me think, what was it about porn back then that made Joey and Chandler want to keep their TV showing porn on? And what is it about today's mainstream porn that is just so important we talk about? To many nowadays, porn is the #1 teacher on sex education. And if that's the case, it's only fair that we ask ourselves, what curriculum does this teacher use? In 2012, Natalie Purcell, who's a PhD in sociology from the University of California, did a content analysis where she looked at over 100 of the roughly 250 most popular and best-selling porn movies. She found aggressive, abusive, and coercive acts in almost every single movie. The analysis also showed how porn, ever since the 70s, has become increasingly more aggressive and humiliating. And by the end of the time period that was analyzed, which was the 2000s, acts like ATM, gagging, double penetration, and even choking were included in almost every single movie. Now, ATM is not the money machine. It's actually an act called ass to mouth, meaning that the penis first enters the anus and then it goes directly into the mouth. And gagging is an act where the penis goes so far down the throat that basically your gag reflexes will start to kick in. It wasn't until the 2000s when these acts were heavily introduced in mainstream porn. 20 years before that, it was basically unheard of. In another interesting study, this one going back to as early as 2005 by Anna Bridgetts and Associates, looked at a random sample of 50 out of the 275 best-selling, most rented US porn movies from the time period of December 2004 to June 2005. Then, out of these 50 movies, they then randomly selected 304 scenes and analyzed them. And here's what they found. About 9 out of 10 scenes contained physical aggression. Now, physical aggression was defined primarily as gagging, remember the penis down the throat, slapping, and even hair pulling, among other things. Also, about 5 out of 10 scenes contained verbal aggression, which then primarily was defined as name-calling, where the most common names that were used were bitch and slut. Most of the people that were exposed to this aggression were women. And what was their typical response to this aggression, you think? Almost everyone reacted either positive or neutral, almost never negative. Let's apply this to everyday life, shall we? Let's say I'd given you a gentle stroke on the cheek. I'd probably see a smile on your face. Had I instead slapped you, you would perhaps not be as happy with me. Am I right? Yeah, I would assume. In porn, the typical response to aggression is precisely the opposite of what you would otherwise expect in real life. In real life, you will be mad at me for slapping you, but in porn, either you remain neutral or you even groan and ask for more. We just have to stop here for a second and consider the message that this is sending. What pressure, what norms, what standards is created from this?
At the mention of the term serial killer, the name Ted Bundy is frequently one of the first to come to mind. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy murdered numerous young women across the United States. In 1980, he was found guilty for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach and sentenced to death. After more than a decade of denials, he eventually confessed to 30 murders, and in 1989, Ted Bundy was executed. The night before that execution, he granted an exclusive interview with Dr. James Dobson, who had served on the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography a few years earlier. Bundy had come to the realization that pornography, while it didn't cause him to commit the murders, was a major contributing factor in what he called behavior too terrible to describe. This was the main message that Bundy wanted to communicate, and he believed that Dr. Dobson would not twist the message as perhaps the mainstream media would. During the interview you're about to see, Bundy stated, "You are going to kill me, and that will protect society from me. But out there are many, many more people who are addicted to pornography, and you are doing nothing about that." 20 years later, we offer this powerful and sobering look back at Dr. Dobson's interview. Now, the Ted Bundy story is, of course, an extreme example of the harm caused by pornography. Our intention is not to be alarmist, nor to say that pornography always leads to such deep pathology. This disturbing example does, however, serve to remind us of the untold harm pornography causes individuals, families, and communities. Whether it's through addictions, sexual abuse, child exploitation, skyrocketing STIs, distorted views of sexuality, or divorce, it's hard to deny the negative effects pornography has on society. On his daily radio program, Dr. Dobson shared about the remarkable circumstances surrounding this interview and the media firestorm that followed. Now, here is that historic discussion with Ted Bundy, as recorded on the eve of his execution back in 1989.
Ted, it is about 2:30 in the afternoon. You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of, or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. What's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment, in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents? of the behavior that we've seen. So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. Understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
All right, let's go back then to those roots. First of all, you, as I understand it, were raised in what you considered to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused, you were not sexually abused, you were not emotionally abused.
No, in no way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation, is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
No, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody, I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know what happened, and I think this is a message I want to get across. But as a young boy, and I mean a boy of 12 or 13, certainly, that I encountered outside the home again, in the local grocery store, the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, that as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. And this also included such things as, let's say, detective magazines and more hardcore.
Those that involve violence.
Yes,
Yeah.
and this is something I think I want to emphasize, is the most damaging kinds of pornography. And again, I'm talking from personal experience. Hard, real, personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence, because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
Now, walk me through that. What was going on in your mind at that time?
Okay, before we go any further, I think it's important to me, and that people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography and not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things. And I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done. That's not the question here. The question and the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies, didn't it?
Well, in the beginning, it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point, you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now, I really want to understand that. You had gone about as far as you could go in your own fantasy life with printed material, and you made or printed and video or film or
film,
photos,
magazines,
yeah.
what have you. Yeah.
And then there was the urge to take that little step or big step over to a physical event.
And it happens, it happened in stages, gradually. It doesn't necessarily, not to me at least, happen overnight. My experience with, I'd say pornography generally, but with pornography that deals on a violent level with sexuality, is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
How long did you stay at that point before you actually assaulted someone?
Well, yeah, you see, that is a very delicate point in my own development, and we're talking about having reached the point or a gray area that surrounded that point over a course of
You don't remember
years.
How long that
was?
was?
I would say a couple of years. And what I was dealing with there were very strong inhibitions against criminal behavior or violent behavior that had been conditioned into me, bred into me in my environment, in my neighborhood, in my church, in my school. Things which said, no, this is wrong. I mean, even to think of it is wrong, but certainly to do it is wrong. And I'm on that edge, and you might say the last vestiges of restraint, the barriers to actually doing something were being tested constantly and assailed through the kind of fantasy life that was fueled largely by pornography.
Do you remember what pushed you over that edge? Do you remember the decision to go for it? Do you remember where you decided to throw caution to the wind?
Again, when you say pushed, I know what you're saying. I don't want to infer again.
I understand that.
That I was some helpless kind of a victim, and yet we're talking about an influence that is the influence of violent types of media and violent pornography, which was an indispensable link in the chain of behavior, the chain of events that led to the behaviors, to the assaults, to the murders, and what have you. It's a very difficult thing to describe. The sensation, of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
Would it be accurate to call that a frenzy, a sexual frenzy?
Well, yes, that's one way to describe it. A compulsion, a building up of this destructive energy. Another factor here that I haven't mentioned is the use of alcohol. But I think that what alcohol did, in conjunction with, let's say, my exposure to pornography, was alcohol reduced my inhibitions. At the same time, the fantasy life that was fueled by pornography eroded them further.
In the early days, you were nearly always about half drunk when you did these things. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Was that always true?
I would say that was generally the case. Almost without exception.
All right, if I can understand it now, there's this battle going on within. There are the conventions that you've been taught. There's the right and wrong that you learned as a child, and then there is this unbridled passion fueled by your plunge into hardcore violent pornography, and those things are at war with each other.
Yes.
And then with the alcohol diminishing the inhibitions, you let go.
Well, yes, and you can summarize it that way, and that's accurate, certainly. And it just occurred to me that some people would say that, well, I've seen that stuff and it doesn't do anything to me. And I can understand that. Virtually everyone can be exposed to so-called pornography, and while they're aroused to it to one degree or another, not go out and do anything wrong.
Well, addictions are like that. They affect some people more than they affect others.
Well,
but there is a percentage of people affected by hardcore pornography in a very violent way, and you're obviously one of them.
That was a major component, and I don't know why I was vulnerable to it. All I know is that it had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
Ted, after you committed your first murder, what was the emotional effect on you? What happened in the days after that?
Well, again, please understand that even all these years later, it's very difficult to talk about it, and reliving it through talking about it is difficult to say the least, but I want you to understand what happened. It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that basically, I mean, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible. To wake up in the morning and realize what I had done, and with a clear mind and all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact at that moment, absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
You really hadn't known that before?
There is just absolutely no way to describe, first, the brutal urge to do that kind of thing, and then what happens is once it has been more or less satisfied and recedes, you might say, or spent, that sense, that kind of energy level recedes, and basically I became myself again. And I want people to understand this too, and I'm not saying this gratuitously because it's important that people understand this, that basically I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum, or I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror from my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy, and I mean, I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay. I was. The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but unfortunately it became overwhelmed at times. And I think people need to recognize that it's not some kind of those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. He snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in a society that tolerates.
You feel this really deeply, don't you? Ted, outside these walls right now, there are several hundred reporters that wanted to talk to you.
Yeah.
And you asked me to come here from California because you had something you wanted to say. This hour that we have together is not just an interview with a man who's scheduled to die tomorrow morning. I am here and you're here because of this message that you're talking about right here. You really feel that hardcore pornography and the doorway to it, softcore pornography, is doing untold damage to other people and causing other women to be abused and killed the way you did others.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's real. It's true.
Ted, what would your life have been like without that influence? You can only speculate.
Yeah. Well, I know it would have been far better, not just for me, and it's, excuse me for being so self-centered here. It would have been a lot better for me and lots of other people. I know that, lots of other innocent people, victims and families. It would have been a lot better. There's no question, but it would have been a fuller life. Certainly a life that would not have involved, I'm absolutely certain, would not have involved this kind of violence that I have committed.
I'm sure, Ted, if I were able to ask you the questions that are being asked out there, one of the most important as you come down to perhaps your final hours, are you thinking about all those victims out there and their families who are so wounded, years later, their lives have not returned to normal. They will never return to normal.
Absolutely.
Are you carrying that load, that weight? Is the remorse there?
Again, I know that people will accuse me of being self-serving, but we're beyond that now. I mean, I'm just telling you how I feel. But through God's help, I have been able to come to the point where much too late, but better late than never, feel the hurt and the pain that I am responsible for. Yes, absolutely. In the past few days, myself and a number of investigators have been talking about unsolved cases, murders that I was involved in. And it's hard to talk about all these years later because it revives in me all those terrible feelings and those thoughts that I have steadfastly and diligently dealt with, and I think successfully, with the love of God. And yet it's reopened that, and I felt the pain and I felt the horror again of all that. And I can only hope that those who I have harmed, and those who I've caused so much grief, even if they don't believe my expression of sorrow and remorse, will believe what I'm saying now, that there is loose in their towns and their communities people like me today whose dangerous impulses are being fueled day in and day out by violence in the media in its various forms, particularly sexualized violence. And what scares me, and let's come into the present now, because what I'm talking about happened 20, 30 years ago, that is, in my formative stages. And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, I mean, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today was stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff...
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
That stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence. There are kids sitting out there switching the TV dial around and come upon these movies late at night, or I don't know when they're on, but they're on and any kid can watch them. It's scary when I think what would have happened to me if I had seen. I mean, scary enough. I mean, that I just ran into stuff outside the home, but to know that children are watching that kind of thing today, or can pick up their phone and dial away for it or send away for it.
Can you help me understand this desensitization process that took place? What was going on in your mind?
Well, by desensitization, I describe it in specific terms is that each time I'd harm someone, each time I'd kill someone, there'd be an enormous amount, especially at first, enormous amount of horror, guilt, remorse afterwards. But then that impulse to do it again would come back even stronger. Now, believe me, I didn't... the unique thing about how this worked, Dr. Dobson, is that I still felt in my regular life the full range of guilt and remorse about other things, regret and...
but you had this compartmentalized...
This compartmentalized, very well-focused, very sharply focused area where it was like a black hole. It was like a, like a crack, and everything that fell into that crack just disappeared. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One of the final murders that you committed, of course, was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's
too painful.
I would like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
I can't begin to understand. Well, I can try, but I'm aware that I can't begin to understand the pain that the parents of these children that I have, and these young women that I have harmed, feel. And I can't restore really much to them, if anything. I won't pretend to, and I don't even expect them to forgive me, and I'm not asking for it. That kind of forgiveness is of God, and if they have it, they have it. If they don't, well, maybe they'll find it someday.
Do you deserve the punishment the state has inflicted upon you?
That's a very good question. And I'll answer very, very honestly. I don't want to die. I'm not going to kid you. I'll kid you not. I deserve certainly the most extreme punishment society has, and I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me. That's for sure. I think what I hope will come of our discussion is I think society deserves to be protected from itself, because as we've been talking, there are forces at loose in this country, particularly again this kind of violent pornography, where on the one hand, well-meaning, decent people will condemn behavior of a Ted Bundy while they're walking past a magazine rack full of the very kinds of things that send young kids down the road to be Ted Bundys. That's the irony. We're talking here not just about more. What I'm talking about is going beyond retribution, which is what people want with me, going beyond retribution and punishment, because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain. But I'll tell you, there are lots of other kids playing in streets around this country today who are going to be dead tomorrow and the next day and the next day and next month, because other young people are reading the kinds of things and seeing the kinds of things that are available in the media today.
Ted, as you would imagine, there's tremendous cynicism about you on the outside, and I suppose for good reason. I'm not sure that there's anything that you could say that people would believe. Some people would believe.
Yeah.
And yet, you told me last night, and I have heard this through our mutual friend John Tanner, that you have accepted the forgiveness of Jesus Christ and are a follower and a believer in Him. Do you draw strength from that as you approach these final hours?
I do.
I'm Pastor Humphrey of Living Word Outreach Ministry, and I want to share a testimony of mine. I've been preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ for 30 plus years. I'm a street preacher, evangelist, but I wasn't always an evangelist. I was heavily involved in porno. Till the Lord deliver me. Porno is a strong addiction. It leads you down to many roads. It have you doing things that that's unbelievable. It have you doing things to yourself. It leads into masturbation. It leads into all type of sexual contact and sexual acts. It destroys marriages. It destroys relationship, and it breaks up home. Pornography, as you know, or maybe you don't know, but it's worldwide and it's all on TV. Now you got women that's showing their cleavers and showing their tailgates. I try to not be so graphic, but I was heavily involved in porno, where it took me to a lot of areas that I'm not proud of. Porno will have you driving in your car and you see a sexual woman. It'll have you masturbating in the car. It'll have you drinking. It'll have you, it's involved lasciviousness, lust, and I was heavily involved in all of that. And that is, porno is something that you cannot get out of. It takes Jesus to break that chain. And even being a preacher, 30 plus years, I still have challenges, because porno is like cocaine. It is a real addiction, and it's a strong addiction. And there are people not only in the world who are bound by this spirit, but that spirit is also permeates in the church, from the pulpit on back. It's challenging to me. Certain things on TV I cannot watch. And the only way that you can break that chain off of you, as I stated before, was through the blood of Jesus. And the second thing, second way to break that chain and to break that bondage of porno is that you gotta quit feeding it. You cannot continue to watch porno and naked women and naked men on TV or in the magazines. Because what it does is that it will stir it up. That spirit will stir lust in you. And so what you have to do is you have to throw away all your porno material that you have in your house. You have to be careful of what movies or what television shows that you watch on TV. I cannot watch certain shows on TV. I cannot, I do go to the beach, but it's hard, it's a challenge for me to go to beaches, because what it does is that it'll stir up lust, or that spirit will try to regain entry in my life. So what I had to do with porno, the third thing you have to do if you are involved in sexual sin or porno is that you have to admit that you got a problem. You have to admit, say, I got a problem. So like an alcoholic, the first thing that they want him or her to do is to admit that you got a problem. The way you be free from porno, the third thing is that you have to admit that you have a problem, and that problem is bigger than you. Sometimes we have to have professional help. I mean, I know Jesus is the one that can break it, but sometimes we have to have professional help. Porno started very early in my life when I was a young boy. And porno magazine and was all in my house. So I began to take a peek. How many know you got to be careful in taking a peek? Because later on, it grew in my life that I was doing things to myself. And when I got into relationships, I wanted my partner to do different acts. See, porno is destructive. And there are people right now, you're listening to me right now, and you're struggling in that area of porno. I know how you feel. I know what you're talking about. I know something stirs up in you when you see a naked woman or half-naked woman. But number one, I would say to admit that you got a problem. You got to admit it. You can't hide it for no. You got to get off the internet. You got to quit circling the web. Admit you got a problem. Number two, you got to turn it over to God. And then number three, if you need professional help, which is nothing wrong with that, but if you need professional help, I think what really set me free from porno is I admit that I had a problem. You have to admit. When an alcoholic goes to AA, the first thing they teach them, him or her, is to admit that you have an alcohol problem. Pornography is stronger than alcohol. I believe pornography, I never done crack, I never done heroin, but pornography it grips your mind, it grips you, it takes control of you. When I admitted that I had a problem, and then that's when I devoted my life unto the Lord. And when I got involved in church and got it and devoted my life unto the Lord, then that's what helped me to be free. But even though that chain was broken, and even though that the Lord has set me free, I still had to be careful in watching certain TV shows or watching different things on the internet or either going to beaches. So if you are struggling in this area, let me let you know that you can be set free. Jesus can set you free, but you have to admit that you have a problem. One of the hardest things for a man to do is to admit that he has a problem. Some women as well, I'm sure, but I'm talking from a man perspective. The alcoholic, when he goes to confession, he said, my name is, and he might tear up or start crying, because that's the hardest thing for him to admit, that he has a problem. And once you admit that you have a problem, then you're on your way to freedom. Amen. God bless. God keep you is our prayer. Hallelujah.
It's a fighting battle. You know, I'm stumbling and Mardi Gras it all up.
Yeah.
And I hear your word, brother. I hear your word, man. You're a good man, and you tell it like it is. My wife's probably calling me, where's my truck right now? Where am I picking me up?
Do you know what porn is?
Yeah, I do.
What is it?
It's let me say, a demeaning factor of what you actually love is. It's something completely different. And pornography is not what love and life is about. It's dirty. I'm not dirty.
Is it good or bad?
Bad.
Why?
Why? Because it's not a true love as God sends. It's not. It's not. It's a something that people that haven't followed the direction that of what love and kindness is about.
In your opinion and thoughts, what is pornography?
Images of the body without consent.
Well, I think even consent, yeah.
Okay, yes.
Say that one more time.
So the showing of the body.
Sexual acts.
Yeah, sexual positions, yes.
What's your thought on it?
Sexual media. Just a general thought.
And one last thing, is it good or is it bad or in the middle?
I think different, really. The crazy stuff is probably bad.
Yeah,
it's probably safe to say that it's bad.
Yeah, the extreme is bad.
I would say like nude portraits and stuff, though. That can be fun. That's great. Artful is good.
Do you guys know, just a fun fact, Houston, Texas, besides leading in child pornography and slavery, has the biggest, highest, which would include churches too, of people that's addicted.
To pornography?
Yeah, not just watch it, but addicted. Like, before they even go anywhere, they gotta do that.
Wow.
Yeah, Houston, Texas was one of the #1, and it's on record too.
That's why we out in Galveston. Yeah.
Praying, reading my word, to the point of fasting. Fast for 2 or 3 days, come off the fast, be good for 7 days, solid, no pornography, no self-gratification. I'm talking about in a relationship, in a marriage, right? Go right back to it, failed. Go to church, attend church regularly, be a part of the church, be a part of ministries, praying, understanding, comprehending scripture and biblical principles and all of that. Go 3 or 4 days, failed again. You know, just so much condemnation, which is what the enemy wants. So much condemnation. You know, said something to my now wife, and thank God for her patience and her prayers. Said something to my now wife about it, you know, prayed about it. Then I'm praying on my own. But see, secretly, I had not detached myself. I didn't really want to get rid of it. Why is that? Because there were still other areas in my life that I was still embracing sin. right? I was still embracing a little slip and a little slide here. And God was telling me, I need you to come all the way out of anything that is not like me. I should be working toward that and not say, well, I'm gonna put a lot of stock and stop in pornography, but not much stock and stop lying, right? Or being deceitful or tricky, whatever that is, So confined in a pastor, and I won't say his name, but confined in a pastor. Didn't go to his church, but I knew him through work. Told him about my struggle, cried right there with him. And I said, man, I need help, man. I can't stop. And we prayed and we went our separate ways. And the Lord told me later on, he had no power to help you. He was bound up in it himself, and I was crushed. I was like, man, where can I go to get help? So so many efforts, so many various points, so many tricks of the trade, so many putting safe locks and stuff on my phone and stuff for myself. But if I know the code, what's the point? I mean, take it off and do what I got to do, beat myself up about it later and put the lock back on there. So, accountability was kind of thin because people judge you viciously. Man, you still dealing with that? I came out of that years ago. Well, I'm not you. So those were all the list of, that's the list of a lot of the failed attempts.
Did you think that, would you say, as you were dealing with this, and by this time you're in your second marriage, that maybe media, your surroundings, friends that weren't believers had possibly an influence in it?
Friends or associates, most definitely. Guys, when we, joke around, that's a part of the joking. Regular TV is definitely on there. But I believe one of the key components to the bondage, the strengthening of the bondage of pornography was through music. The subliminal messages, and then some of the direct messages, like some of the R&B artists. I remember listening to one particular one, I'm not going to say his name, but, just, man, so influential and really gets your mind to flowing and really thinking about the act of sex, beyond what you already have at home waiting for you. So music. If I had to tell anyone one of the strong and most powerful, potent ways to come out of pornography, first off, you got to guard your ears, guard your eyes as well, but the ears more so, because it's secret, it's hidden, it's something in the music. It's like they spike the Kool-Aid, and it's not just the words that they sing, because even if it was a cappella, it's how they sing, and it's breathy, and it puts your state into a euphoria or imagination of what they're talking about, like you're there in the sex session, and then all of a sudden you want to be a part of that too. So what you have may not do, because your mind has been seduced to want more and to have varieties just based on the music that you listen to. And I'm not just talking to rap, and some of it is just like regular R&B. Artists who say, hey, I'm lonely and I want this and I want that out of a mate, and boom, there you are. So restarts the clock. So you just swore, this is it, I'm done. I'm deleting the apps, because now, we fast forward and now we on apps now. I don't need no magazines at this point, right? So just think about this. I went from VHS and paperback. So this is how many generations this thing had a hold on me, to digital. Well, should I say magazines to digital, meaning like VCRs, then to DVDs. Then to social media, or should I say YouTube, or should I say the apps that you can go in, and it's free. So this is how many generations this thing was on me. I've gone through a technology phases, if you will. Think about it. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, it is
but
crazy.
That's the truth, though. Very unfortunate that, you talk to people about the struggles. And, I did a teaching on it, 2 phases of the teaching, reviving Adam, and I talked about it. But, it's just based on the mind of a man being made up to really come out of this phase, to really come out of the struggle. And you have to really be at the end of yourself. You got to want more. One of the ways that God began to show me, okay, how to come out of this, it's not about me. Actually, if out of 100%, maybe 10% is about me. The rest is for other people. So God told me one day, he said, if you want to come out because you want to serve me the more. You want to serve me with clarity. You want to serve me with no condemnation hanging over your head, because I'm not the author of condemnation anyway. So I told the Lord myself after I heard that, Lord, I want to be right with you. Lord, I want to come out of this so I can serve you the more and not be self-serving of myself. Woo, I'm free. I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm free anyway. No. That was not the mindset that I had.
Okay.
So I shifted my thoughts.
Okay. Now, so now this takes me to deliverance.
Uh-huh.
What would you be able to recommend in terms of deliverance? How do you come out of that? How do you remain free?
I forget where it's at in the Word of God. Confess your sins one to another so that you may be healed. The fervent prayers of a righteous man availeth much. I know it's New Testament. It's either James chapter 5, probably James chapter 5, verses 16 and 17. You might want to check me on that. I'd hate to mislead someone. But confessing my sins to my wife the second time with a heart of, I'm done. Now, there was a process that I wrote about in the book that I had to go through to get to the point where I was done. See, being done is not all of a sudden, not for me anyway, and I believe not for most people. It's not just you jump over this line and say, I'm done. It's a shedding off. It's an onion. It's layers. It's a process, right? So I had to shed off being lazy to the things of God, and I became a servant. I wanted to serve not with an intent to get back, just to serve, just to be a part of a body of believers. I wanted to know more of God beyond what I already knew. So that required me to study more. That required me to really fast, not because the family is fasting, not because the church is fasting, but I wanted to fast to buffet this flesh, push it down, tell it no, even though in a lot of cases it would kick back even stronger after the fast. I'm right back at it, right? But, we fall down, but, we have to get back up, dust yourself off and keep going, So went through that phase, becoming a hearer and a doer of the word. Now that was critical because, we hear the word more than often. Most of the world's little fancy cliches, that's text taken out of the Bible, so you hear the word, more than you think, but being a doer of the word, now that took discipline. So I could no longer go down the path of seek ye first the kingdom of God and after his righteousness and just quote it and not seek him first. So I had to start seeking him. Then I had to understand the definition. Okay, what does it mean to seek? And I found out that means to be obedient. That means to sacrifice. That means to love your neighbor as yourself. Just basic biblical principles that we know, right? But I had to do it and not just do it just to check a box. I found myself, like, this is the process you asked me about. I had to do it to make it a part of my life. It had to become me, right? So I'm going through all these phases, I'm confessing my sins to the Lord. But at that point, I hadn't really talked to anybody yet, right? I hadn't really sat down with anybody because there was no one that I could really trust. I tried it with this one pastor who was neutral, but he was struggling with it too. I said, okay.
So you would say, and just to kind of throw something in there, you would say a lot of pastors, teachers, ministers engage in pornography in some level. If you would say overall, how many you would say?
I couldn't because I don't know that many. Out of the few that I have met, I know of 2 who have. because people don't share.
Right.
That's closet conversation.
Now, would it surprise you that, especially in the news today, court peer review, that I would say a good 75% actually engage into that on a regular basis?
If it's peer reviewed, meaning that it's not circumstantial, or it's not one of those things where they're assuming, if it's factually backed up, yeah, I would believe it, because it's peer reviewed. But here's the challenge with that: being focused on what other people were doing at that time didn't help me. It didn't help me, and it won't help anyone. Well, they got a problem with it too, so I'm okay. That's where the challenge comes in at. We look at our neighbor to the left and to the right and say, if they're both struggling with it, then I'm okay. See, this is all about me, myself, and I, and of course God, but not necessarily directly impacting only me. Right. So I had to get in that space where, Lord, I want to be free to serve your people. I don't want to be free so I can get out of that category. Right. So I had to move across that body of water, so to speak, that was hindering me, being concerned about the person to the left or right, and get delivered so I can go on and do some great things in the kingdom for God and for his glory, not for me and myself. Right. So I didn't. There's folks out there. As a matter of fact, there was one pastor that I talked to, and the only way I found out that he was in it, I think he slightly mentioned it, I'm not certain, but I remember one day in prayer, God showed me that he was, and he wanted me to confront him with it secretly, right? Because, you can't help nobody by embarrassing them, So I did. He came back later and said, yeah, that was it. Trust me, the conversation didn't go that easy, because initially it was a lot of denial, but he came back later and said, yeah, it's a struggle. He said, I fight it. I pray against it, and I give it pushback and don't allow it to move me into condemnation, basically, So yeah, it's a struggle. And it's not just men, pastors. It's not just men in general, embracing wet dreams. That's the same thing. When you embrace the wet dreams, when you wake up and you gratify yourself based on the wet dream, that's the same thing. It's just pornography without the book or without the app. It's the same thing. You're still worshiping lust, basically. So we can go all kind of ways with this, man. All kind of ways. Yeah, I know we can.
And the thing is, the generation that we're in now is affected no matter what age, no matter what gender. It's everywhere.
Right. And I would say this, Orlando, that between pornography and molestation, and everything else that comes in between that, sex outside of marriage, perhaps, or a history of adultery in the marriage, that actually stems and leads people over to transgender, homosexuality, lesbianism, because they can't get gratification where they're at, or there's an identity crisis because the home was in shambles, or they found themselves to be secretly, unfortunately, and it's not their fault when there's molestation. It's not their fault, but there's something they can do about it, right? They find themselves being aroused by the molestation secretly, and versus having the opportunity to talk to somebody about it, they isolated. So they went in that direction more and more and more and more till it got to the point they were no longer themselves. They were a product, come on, thank you, Lord, of that molestation. And they accepted it. And then they used that same energy, they used that same hurt to fuel their agenda at that point.
So you would say pornography definitely is the catalyst.
Yes, sir. It's the catalyst. It's the jump off, I believe. Right. And it dates back. I mean, you've done your studies. It dates back to, all the false idols and false gods, where they had the statues that were built with engorged breasts to make it be more attractive, or with a rather large phallus to make it be more attractive. That was pornography then, carved and chipped out of stone. So
yeah, I was looking at the history of the Romans, man,
mm-hmm.
and one of the big things is just the carnality in it,
mm-hmm.
to where it was so aggressive. That was their way of life.
And that was a way of worship. Look at Corinth.
Yeah, Corinth.
Look at the prostitute church,
mm-hmm.
the church prostitutes. How does that no, not church, the temple prostitutes, and the way you would pay your tithes or pay homage to these false idols,
mm-hmm.
lowercase g gods, you would go pay the prostitutes for sex, men and women.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
And that's just been the one thing that has been through the century.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been it's older practice than prostitute.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's your visualization, and then what you were saying as far as hearing it and
mm-hmm.
influences and things of that
right.
nature. And so in our society, we still have that old Roman Babylonian spirit, that
mm-hmm.
has with it those things,
mm-hmm.
and is affecting our culture now.
Right.
I would say that's probably the one of the greatest battles. I would say it's between doing drugs and that, they kind of go hand in hand.
They do,
because their addiction, it increases the I forget what you call I guess the enzymes in your body.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of like it's overstimulates like the dopamine.
Yeah, dopamine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It causes it to be larger mm-hmm. than other portions of the mind, right? Where it wants more and it needs more, and so now it's at the point where it consumes more of your time, mm-hmm. and it has to be fed.
Right, it has to be fed.
Right.
So here's something I learned recently. This was a gentleman that talked to me about this. He's a police officer, but he deals with drugs investigation and stuff like that. He said a lot of people that take meth, it's a prime example. It's mm-hmm. something I didn't know, or even marijuana that's laced, but more specifically meth. They say the first time it takes it, it actually doubles your testosterone and your sex drive.
Oh, wow.
So now you take, and this is maybe the first or second time. After that, you got to continue to use it to get that same high. Mm-hmm. But basically, he was saying that it increases so much that you can basically literally do it all night, basically. And I'm just using the vernacular terminology of it, obviously. Mm-hmm. But he was saying it increases that, but it over increases that. Which mm-hmm. means is, now, you see some of the appearances of people when they use stuff like that, it starts to age them and, teeth rot out. It's method mm-hmm. and stuff, but it does increase that. So now can you imagine taking something like that, then doing all this other stuff? And a lot of people, they say that gets involved in that, the first step and what started was some form of pornography. That's how it started. And it usually starts at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
being around the wrong crowd.
Around the wrong crowd.
My first influence of getting into pornography, hanging around somebody that I had no business hanging around. He was a little older than me, but he was the neighborhood no good guy. Him and and some of the guys that he hung around with. But being a lonely kid, I feel like I was isolated because of my rejection issues. All of that plays a combination, and we give the devil too little credit when it comes through working through rejection, working through those things that you deal with in order to have other people easily attract you and pull you in and move you in the wrong direction. Thanks be to God, I've never tried drugs, but the other thing that had me hooked, God redeems the time that I lost, but man, I spent a lifetime, 30 years, man, hooked, fruitless. Fruitless, meaning when I say fruitless, I'm not talking about it in a physical sense, not being able to hold down a job, not being able to provide for my family, but fruitless in the things that matter the most. In addition to those things I just said, fruitless in the things of God. you know.
Is that where you come up with, your book that you wrote, 30 Years a Slave?
Yeah.
Based on that?
That's based on that.
Just being in bondage and not really producing anything, not bearing fruit.
Exactly. Not bearing fruit. And even as parents, and I wrote about that a little bit because, being raised in a Christian home, obviously, father, pastor, mother being on the same, equally yoked with, dad. But there's things that we can still miss out on as parents, as it pertains to raising our children. I wrote in the book some things that you have to pay attention to with these kids. You have to raise them with the intent that I'm going to raise them, meaning I'm going to watch them and I'm going to shelter and I'm going to protect and keep them physically, mentally, spiritually, obviously financially, socially. All those categories have to be monitored. They have to be monitored. Anytime there's sickness, anytime like mom was sick, so dad's attention kind of shifted towards mom more so, when she had her down times. And that's when, the enemy would slip in and allow, us to get away with things because we're not being properly watched, and it's no fault of the parents. But, these are just things, when you know better, you do better. So, I wrote the book to help warn people, not just the people who are hooked on pornography, but the parents to make sure this doesn't happen to yours, knowing the signs. I'll say this, Orlando, and I'm a firm believer in it. Your discernment is the most, as a parent, your discernment, and I'm not talking about our little goofy detective skills. I noticed that your internet was on an hour or two longer than normal. What have you? I mean, that's good to have those safe locks in place for our children. But how's about after I wrote the book, and obviously delivered them, God would direct me to pay attention to certain things that my son was doing because the enemy was coming for him too with the same thing. So in the middle of the night, I would wake up and I'd notice certain apps that were open on his iPad. I come downstairs for a cup of water and I never do that, right? But my point is the voice of the Holy Spirit guiding us, and helping us guide our children through so they don't have to go through this war and combat zone of tearing away from these dead end habits and pornography and stuff, so.
You can find OV Ministries on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, or on Vimeo. For immediate access to OV Ministries webpage, go to his Linktree website. We hope that you were blessed with today's message, and may you continue to keep the faith even as we go through trials in today's world. Remember, Jesus is coming soon, and may he find you ready for him.